Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. The operation had lasted more than 6 hours. At first everyone thought that the guy who had been brought in with a horrible stab wound would simply not survive. But Andrew was professional enough to prevent that. After all, he was considered a first-rate specialist for a reason. One of the few in the country who would take on the most seemingly impossible tasks. Here too, by all available risk indicators, the possibility of saving the patient was reduced to nothing. Too much blood and time had been lost along the way. But he wasn't just able to save the kid's life. He was able to stitch up the wound so that the stitching not only did not ruin his appearance, but on the contrary, made it more brutal. Just kidding. During a game battle of reenactors depicting medieval sword fights, the patient managed to badly fall on his own weapon. And almost with his face, the guy's neck and entire right cheek were severely cut. And it was only by some miracle that the blade of the designer saber had not hit his arteries and nerves. The specialists who brought him to the private clinic, where the surgeon worked, were well aware that in a regular hospital, they would not have had time to help the patient. Andrew was in medical circles almost a living legend, so the medics could only hope that the surgeon could create another miracle. And they were right. However, few could imagine how given to the brilliant surgeon such miracles. He was only 47. But sometimes he felt like a deep 100-year-old man when he was faced with a truly difficult case. The man put into saving such a patient not only his professional skills, but also absolutely all his moral strength. That was why he was sometimes called an archangel, alluding to a certain mystical power in the surgeon's hands the moment the next serious patient came to his table. The man fought for every human life to the last and never looked at the material status of patients. The doctor had dozens of lives saved. In addition, he often went to the base for the training of young personnel in the rescue service and gave lectures on first aid in extreme situations. For this, his colleagues respected him immensely and were sometimes amazed at his efficiency. If it was necessary, the surgeon could stay in the clinic around the clock, observing the condition of this or that patient. This did not mean, however, that Andrew was some kind of living robot. On the contrary, his emotional side was as well developed as his intellectual one, and therefore the specialist sometimes had to restrain himself with incredible difficulty from feeling feelings for people whose lives, by the will of fatal accident, turned out to be entirely dependent on his medical actions. The surgeon absorbed his love for medicine, as they say, with the milk of his mother. Andrew and his both worked as doctors in the regional hospital, and his father also participated in various special operations in the combat zone as a military field doctor. These men dedicated their entire lives to serving the Hippocratic Oath. Anne, Andrew's mother, worked half her life as a plastic surgeon, but not a private one, but a public one. She corrected defects in people in various traumatic situations or due to hereditary changes in their bodies, when genetics suddenly played a bad joke with people and had an extremely negative impact on their appearance. Anne worked exactly until she was diagnosed with acquired arthritis of the wrist joints. Content with what he already had, by being satisfied with the bare necessities, the young doctor learned not to divide his patients into poor and rich. And if a person needed help urgently, no matter how poor a homeless person he was, Andrew had to provide it, and he did so without any contempt for that person. This approach was somewhat shocking to his colleagues at the time. The surgeon, who at first worked in a very ordinary city hospital, did not take kindly to the head physician, when in the dead of night they sometimes received this kind of patients without documents and no place of residence. However, the young surgeon did not care at all, and contrary to the reproaches of the chief physician, he tried to do everything possible to ensure that after some time such patients were able to leave their hospital healthy, and, as they say, on their own 2 feet. What he was really disliked in that hospital was the fact that the specialist never took bribes, as a matter of principle. This man had his own code of honor, where in black and white was prescribed this and very sensitive point. He had seen too many cases where rich parents of young, reckless, rich kids literally put huge bundles of money in the hands of the head of the department and some other doctors just to have their negligent son or daughter pumped out after a monstrous drug overdose. Or, conversely, willing to buy a place on the waiting list for a vital organ transplant, while other ordinary people had to wait years for their turn. All of this filled him with undisguised disgust. But even more disdainful in his eyes were the very doctors who were not shy about taking bribes, thus putting one life above another. One day the surgeon said all this in his heart to an old acquaintance and former colleague who had been engaged in private practice for several years. He invited the surgeon for a cup of coffee on the occasion of a joyful meeting, and now listened with interest to his opinion about corrupt specialists. So there you go. Andrew complained to his friend about his colleagues, and the saddest thing about it all is, yes, that there are such cases in almost every hospital. And we work in the capital. We can say that we represent the face of domestic medicine. And I am ashamed of them, and I cannot understand them. What is there to understand? Sadly, Alexander smiled at his friend. The explanation is the simplest one. They need the money, and that's all there is to it. You know what the salaries are now? And after the optimization, what happened to the budget? Well, I don't need to explain it to you. In fact, that's why I went into private practice when all this mess started. Of course, I had to take out a loan. But what can you do nowadays? No decent business is done without credit, especially a private clinic. The equipment alone took so much money, and after all, and taxes have to be paid. Men talked a little more on the subject of modern health care, after which a former colleague suddenly offered the surgeon to go to work for him. Andrew was quite surprised by such an offer. I do not know what to tell you, Alexandra. He hesitated. Working in a private clinic is not the same as working for the state. Your standards are stricter. And in general, will I be able to get along with my politics? Alexander just smiled slyly at his old friend. That standards are stricter, in that you're right. So you graduated from university, right? The whole capital has already heard about your achievements. What's the point of keeping such a valuable specialist on starvation rations in the hospital? Believe me, our working day is no different from how you live now. The only difference is that the patients know where they are going and that they will have to pay for a visit. There are no bribes because everything is already paid for. Everything by check, you see. Otherwise, the same patients, the same problems. Only instead of bureaucracy, there's a concrete price tag. Andrew shook his head hesitantly. And what about the common people? Alexander bowed his head understandingly, while confidently cutting a muffin on his snow-white plate, served with coffee. Honestly, we don't get those very often. However, and he confidently sent a piece of dessert into his mouth with a large sip of dark-flavored drink. And for this case, our clinic has a special quota, for example. If all the hospitals are busy, or already, cannot bring the patient, there is a risk of premature death. Such patients are sent to us by default, and they do not have to pay for anything. It's possible for us to do something good without burdening the person financially. Interesting philosophy, the surgeon said thoughtfully. Tell you what, Andrew, take a week to think about it. If you think about it, give me a call. I'll leave you my card. We really need specialists at your level. On wages will not hurt. We are not strangers. The knowledge you have is worth its weight in gold. And you have God's medical intuition. That's very rare these days, believe me. It would be a sin if you wasted your talent on years of work in a rotten hospital. He often remembered that conversation later. In a way, his friend had been right. If he hadn't gone to him then, there's no telling what would have happened to his professionalism now. Indeed, it could have happened that the best years of his working form, the young surgeon at the time, might have been spent endlessly clarifying relations with the utterly corrupt managers of that city hospital. Not long ago, the man saw a big report on the internet about the closure of this ill-fated institution and the arrest of its chief physician. Once again, his intuition failed him. It turned out that for several years, the head of the hospital had been illegally selling donor organs. illegally removed from deceased patients. When the face of his former head of the department appeared in the frame, the man even twitched in disgust. Now, Andrew had been successfully working in his friend's clinic for more than 15 years, and all that time, he periodically treated absolutely ordinary citizens, and absolutely free of charge. In this part of the persuasion, his friend did not lie to him. The quota really existed, and the surgeon was lucky to save many good people with it. If professionally Andrew was more than successful, unfortunately his personal life was quite the opposite. His wife Helga left the surgeon 5 years ago, when it was no longer possible to hide her numerous adulteries from her husband. Working as a PR manager in a large media holding, Helga often helped the director of the clinic, the same Alexander, with the preparation of advertising and press conferences, able to once again raise the prestige of his institution among the secular public. He himself at first was even glad of such an initiative of his wife. The more sponsors and patrons they could attract to their side, the higher the quota within which he could save ordinary people. However, trouble came when it was not expected. Very soon the man began to notice that his wife stayed too long at business meetings and so-called business lunches. The woman began to periodically spend the night away from home or come even later than the doctor himself, and not always in a sober state. All questions from his wife Helga answered the same way. I was busy, or oh, Bunny, there was such a difficult meeting. The horror. Well, then we went with the girls to a cafe to relax a little. Really? I just had a couple of drinks. This went on for 3 years, during which time the man constantly had to endure the occasional absence of his wife, and, as a consequence, a hot meal. Everything was resolved quite unexpectedly. One day the surgeon went on day duty after another long, sleepless night. Helga wasn't home at the time, and her phone kept telling the doctor's answering machine voice that his wife wasn't available at the moment. Walking through the physical therapy department, he suddenly heard a familiar voice coming from the local resident's office. Unwittingly listening to the sounds of laughter and kissing, Enru was surprised to recognize his wife's voice. Overcoming the remaining distance to the resident's room with quick steps, he abruptly opened the door. The first thing that struck the surgeon's eye was a glass coffee table, on which a bottle and discussed the latest news from the world of sports. Both men were very fond of soccer and hockey. The boy lowered his eyes ashamedly, as there was no point in saying anything and making excuses. "What am I doing here?" "Actually, me and Nicholas," he nodded at the physiotherapist. "We both work here. And what have you been doing here with him all this time?" "Nicholas, why aren't you talking?" She shoved the shoulder of her suddenly silenced lover. "Tell him something." "Andrew, I'm sorry. Anyway, Helga and I have been seeing each other for a long time. We just didn't want to worry you too much. You have enough to do in this surgery. Every day is stressful." The physical therapist hesitantly reached for his shirt, trying to undo the buttons with trembling fingers. The surgeon only grinned bitterly. "Every day is stressful," he repeated the boy's last words. "That's for sure. You, Nicholas, get ready for work quietly. Otherwise, the head of the department will come, and you'll be here like this. It's not nice. We'll talk to you at home, Helga. And please be on time tonight." Having said this, Andrew silently left the room under the frowning gaze of his wife, allowing her and her lover to tidy themselves up without prying eyes. In the evening, an unpleasant conversation awaited the couple at home. To Helga's great annoyance, Andrew did not make a stormy scene and scandal with the beating of dishes. The man only wanted to find out why his wife had suddenly decided she would be better off with someone else than with him. Of course, he was maddened and hurt. After all, this kind of betrayal hurts a lot. "Why? Why? Don't you know why?" his wife asked him in a mocking tone. "Sometimes it seems to me that you do not care whether I am at home or not. You are focused on your work and do not notice anything around. And I needed your attention, you know. Love, whatever. You don't really know if you love me, do you? You never did. But you could at least remember that it was our wedding anniversary last week, and I'm not really old yet. A Nicholas of all people has made me feel that way. Did you know that he and I have been together for 3 years now? The man felt an icy chill take hold of his clasped hands. He slowly looked up at his wife. 3 years, he asked again in a husky voice. And you have kept silent all this time? But why? Why? She only waved her blonde hair in a disgruntled manner. Because, my darling, because I waited until the last minute to see if you would get suspicious, jealous of me. After all, I hoped that we might still have a child. The woman quickly brushed a single tear from her cheek. But you're obviously childless. You're burnt out from your surgeries. You're on your feet 24 hours a day. You're working. How can you pay attention to your wife? The topic of having children together has always been a sore point for them. Almost all 20 years that the couple lived together, they periodically tried to have a baby, but nothing worked out for the couple. Even artificial insemination, which the wife underwent as many as 4 times, did not help. All the time the woman blamed her husband for what happened, alluding to the man's inability to have children. However, how much the surgeon would not pass on this account of examinations, he has not found any special problems. As for the woman, she strongly resisted even the idea that something could be wrong with her. Surprisingly, her tests also showed nothing special. That is, the reason for the forced childlessness of the couple was hidden in something else. Have you ever thought that you have not been able to conceive all these years just because there may be a banal physiological incompatibility between you? Andrew was once asked by a doctor who was watching him. What do you mean? The surgeon didn't quite understand. Are you saying that we are not compatible? Not exactly, Andrew warned the anxious man. You see, sometimes it happens that way. Spouses love each other, but they can't have children. And not because of some psychological problems in the family, though such variant is not excluded, but because their bodies do not react to each other physically in the way they need to create posterity. Nature sort of hints to people that it is better for them not to even try. You know, mind, the wife said in a trembling voice. Tomorrow I'm going to pack my things and move in with Nicholas. We'll file for divorce as soon as the property division papers come in. And do not worry, I will not have a claim to your cottage. Take care of your own tomatoes. The sharp voice of his wife brought the surgeon back from his memories to the present moment. Andrew was well aware that she never liked him, as well as growing vegetables. So he took what his wife said with a certain amount of irony. You know, maybe you're right, said Andrew at last. After all the years we have lived together, we have never been happy. Do as you please. I hope that with Nicholas you will find the long-awaited happiness. My wife kept her promise, leaving the very next day. However, her long-awaited happiness of a woman she did not manage to catch. A couple of months later, for some unknown reason, her lover quit his job and moved to another city. Helga, naturally, was the last to know about it. By this time, she and her husband had already managed to sell their common apartment, and on the money received in the divorce, the surgeon bought a nice studio near her place of work. He gave the car to his wife, and now he walked to work, seeing it primarily as a concern for his own health. After Nicholas' sudden betrayal, Helga tried to build bridges with her husband that he had personally burned. But the man had no desire to enter the same river a second time. In the end, the ex-wife herself asked the bosses to transfer to the northern capital, to be away from bad memories and try to start the second half of her life from scratch. Andrew, for his part, also saw the unexpected release as a new attempt to get on with his life. Now that he was no longer burdened by constant worries about his ex-wife, he could fully concentrate on the work he loved. Immersion in the doctor's daily routine helped to some extent to heal the wounds in his soul. Every day, saving people's lives, it was as if he wanted to prove to himself that he was still capable of bringing benefit to this world, and that resentment against a single woman would not be able to erase all the good that still remained in his life. Sometimes, however, when he returned to his empty apartment, the man would experience acute bouts of loneliness, involuntarily sinking into an abyss of memories. Sitting in the evening in front of the open window, the doctor recalled the days of his student days. That sweet and at the same time bitter time when he loved himself and was loved by a wonderful girl who gave the then student a lot of joyful and exciting moments. However, those times are long gone, and now for him the meaning of all life was the practice of medicine. The clinic became almost a home for the man, where he spent most of his time. The surgeon preferred to spend the other half of his time with his faithful dog Chaplin, who had become a real emotional outlet for him. He picked up Chaplin when he was just a puppy, found the baby in an alley on his way home from work. The tiny puppy whimpered loudly. He could see that he had only recently opened his eyes, and as fate would have it, he was left alone. The doctor felt pity for the dog, so he decided to take him in and keep him. He even fed the puppy with milk from a pacifier, but the puppy soon became a meal of healthy dog food, which greatly helped his ever-busy owner. At work, the surgeon was often laughed at, saying that he finally had a child in his old age, albeit with a tail and 4 paws. He just guffawed, saying, "You understand too much." Now he would have a faithful friend who would not let him finally fall into the abyss of nostalgia and self-injury. Chaplin grew up a strong, handsome dog with mottled hair and a large fur collar, which somewhat resembled the husky breed. The large brown eyes on his muzzle were thickly lined with a black spot. In fact, because of this trait, which gave him birth to the American actor Charlie Chaplin, he, as a puppy, got his nickname from his owner. The dog greeted the man every evening or morning, depending on the surgeon's duty, with joyful barking and wagging his lush tail. Thus the dog very subtly reacted to the mood of his master and always guessed when he should approach him with a request to play and when he should behave quietly and give a rest. The man adored his 4-legged companion. They seemed to understand each other without words. In their free time, they often went for walks in the central city park, and many dog owners, seeing them from a distance, joyfully waved back, inviting them to join their good company. One day, walking through town with Chaplin on his day off, the man witnessed a rather strange picture. Walking past the bus station, Andrew noticed a young pregnant girl talking about something with a cab driver. Drivers offering their services at competing prices lined the curb, beckoning commuters and attracting citizens. He would never have looked in the direction of that stranger had it not been for one of her but. The mother-to-be was dressed very poorly, almost in rags. The old blue blouse was wiped at the elbows with holes, and the long skirt with an elastic band was no more than a piece of the cheapest chintz, ready to break from its flimsiness on the already protruding belly of the girl. The image was complemented by old flat-soled sneakers and obviously found in the trash in different lengths of socks. In her hands, she modestly held a very small bouquet of carnations, and on her head, protecting her from the harsh spring wind, waved a simple gray kerchief. She tearfully begged one of the cab drivers to take her somewhere, to which place the surgeon could not hear, but to all her pleas, the drivers responded in the same way. "Listen, girl, don't stop honest people from making money. You told me how much money. Only for it. Anything less, no. Understand?" The man with an oriental accent was clearly irritated by the insistence of a talkative passenger. "I only have half," she almost sobbed. "Please." "Well, what do you need on such a day?" "I really need. You see, soon, maybe not even be able to get anywhere." She looked at the driver pregnant, gently stroking the fall out of the skirt belly. "Enough with the ceremonies with these bums." The other driver came up to the two of them. "Don't you understand something, you wretch? Do you want to keep your baby?" The girl was taken aback by such rudeness, and only clapped her huge eyes and nodded affirmatively. "Now get out of here." The man loomed over her, moving menacingly closer. "Or do you want to settle up in kind?" Andrew swiftly approached the pregnant woman, shielding her back from the insolent driver, The dog barked loudly, forcing him to retreat. "What do you want, man?" "Nothing," he answered calmly. "Stop threatening the girl, or I'll call the police and have your whole posse dispersed in no time." The driver only raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture, saying that I don't want any problems. The man turned around to face the pregnant woman and took out his wallet from his jacket, took out a sum in excess of the required amount, and then handed it to the frightened girl. "Here, take it. I see you really need to be in that place. The driver will get you there safely, won't he?" The surgeon gloomily looked at the Oriental-looking driver who had been trying to get rid of the penniless girl a minute before. "Yes, of course. Of course I will. Why not? There is money. Sit down, girl. Make yourself comfortable." The driver tried to smile weakly, but he was not very good at it. "Is it really for me?" the pregnant stranger asked in surprise. "Oh my God, thank you so much. I will pay you back, I promise. You write me your address, and I'll send you a postal order." "Calm down," the man interrupted her. "I don't want anything from you. It is a trifle to me, and it is much more important to you now." The surgeon was surprised at such a sincere expression of gratitude. He, for his part, had shown a purely human sympathy for the girl, and of course, did it without a backward glance, not hoping for a refund. Sniffing her nose from the incoming tears, the mother, to be said in a trembling voice, "Thank you again. Today is a very special day for me, my mother's birthday, so I wanted to give her a present." Embarrassed, she looked her unexpected benefactor straight in the eyes. She looked to be in her 20s. Andrew merely brushed her off. "So of course it's entirely up to you what to spend the money on. But please be careful. In your position, you should avoid too much emotion." She smiled slightly and then climbed into a cab. The driver had already opened the door for her helpfully. The man and his dog continued walking, giving one last warning look at the cab drivers who had stayed on the road. On the way home, the surgeon heard the phone vibrate insistently in his jacket pocket. Glancing at the display, the man nodded contentedly. He received a call from a private detective he had hired a couple of months ago to find out some information for himself. "Hello, this is Victor. There is a detective agency calling for you. Do you remember?" "Of course," he agreed. "To be honest, I didn't expect the results so quickly. Did you find anything?" The voice on the other end of the phone smugly hummed. I found something, and not something, but something." "That's why I paid you such a generous advance, Victor," he retorted. "I hope you have some specific data." "Yes, I'll send you the file. It has everything you want to know." After a second, the surgeon's smartphone beeped softly, notifying him of the arrival of a new email. When he opened it, the surgeon actually found a text file inside, in which all the information he needed was structured. The results of the investigation were collected at the very end in a separate list. The detective hurriedly voiced to his client the most important things. I'm afraid you'll have to go to Alley 8 Cemetery, row 26, third grave on the right. That's where she's buried. Your first love, 20 years ago." The client thanked the detective and assured him that the remainder of his fee would be deposited in his account shortly. After that, the surgeon took Chaplin home, poured food for him, and then took a discreet car-share car in which he drove to the cemetery listed in the report. The wind was blowing particularly hard that day, tangling in the hem of his dark coat. Andrew wandered through the cemetery, searching among the hundreds of gray tombstones for the grave of his only beloved woman. Soon he managed to find the right place. To the surgeon's surprise, the grave of his beloved was well maintained. The fence had only recently been painted black, no trash, and a nice, modest marble monument with a portrait depicting a happy, much-smiling woman in life. On the grave were fresh flowers, a bouquet of red carnations that somehow seemed vaguely familiar to Andrew. "What are you doing here?" A woman's voice came up beside him. He turned around and saw the very pregnant woman he had given money for a cab to this morning. She was carrying heavy plastic bottles of water. Obviously, she was going to clean up this very grave. The surgeon felt his head spinning violently. Feeling that the shock was about to overtake him like a wave, he asked quietly, "Wait, who are you and who are you to this woman?" The pregnant woman looked at him blankly as she set the bottle on the ground. She wiped her dirty hands on the hem of her skirt before answering. "So this is my mother. She died 20 years ago when I was only 2 or 3 years old. I don't remember exactly. Did you know her?" I don't remember. Did you know her?" Yes. Just then, he noticed how much this poor girl resembled his first and only love of his life. The same auburn waves that cascaded thickly below her shoulders, the same huge gray eyes that had the unique feature of turning blue in moments of happiness, and even the snow, white, almost porcelain skin. "And you? What's your name?" the surgeon asked the girl, stifling his last breath. "Emily," the young mother answered, still looking at him with bewilderment. The man felt his eyes fill with bitter tears. Painful images of his own past began to appear before his gaze. There was as much joy and love in him as there was misery and disappointment. He had met her in the most ordinary canteen. He was in his 5th year of medical school, dreaming of a career as a heart surgeon. In between classes, he and his friends often looked at a small but cozy canteen, which was located a couple of blocks' walk from their school. It was there, in line at the cash register, that he first saw her, a girl with a waterfall of brown hair and bottomless eyes the color of a stormy sky. "Will you be taking pies?" he asked the girl ahead of him, squinting cautiously at the last 2 patties that were sitting languidly in the pastry display case. "It depends on what they're with," the stranger replied with a smile. "If, for example, with potatoes or onions and eggs, then no. But if it's chicken or marmalade, I'm sorry." Thank God the boy sighed with relief. "These are just the ones with potato." "I didn't think the fate of baked goods would be of such interest to medical graduates," joked the beautiful girl, laughing gleefully. Andrew was doused in hot water. "And how do you know?" asked the student, amazed by the girl's powers of observation. She only smiled slyly in response. "Well, it is no wonder. You medics smell of medicinal alcohol and other medicines a mile away. If it weren't for the open windows, you could suffocate." The girl laughed again, and the boy thought he was ready to listen to the sound of her voice forever. That same day, the young men returned home from class together. The young medical student volunteered to accompany the girl to her neighborhood. Luba was studying to be a seamstress. She knew a lot of interesting things about the characteristics of fabrics and the construction of advantageous plots of clothing, and very much hoped that one day she would be able to become a real fashion designer. Cheerfulness and determination of the girl really impressed him, and soon he did not notice how he fell head over heels in love with her. Fortunately, she reciprocated his feelings, and between them instantly broke out in a fire of true all-consuming adolescent passion. She loved the student's funny stories from his medical practice, and she really wanted him to be able to accomplish everything he had planned for himself over the next few years. The only dark spot in the girl's life was her own parents. It so happened that the future seamstress grew up in a family of alcoholics and outright marginalized people. Her mother abused too much alcohol, and because of her extremely difficult relationship with money, sometimes sold her own body to get a few more drinks and some food. The girl had no father as such. There was only her stepfather, an alcoholic like her mother, but with an even more pernicious addiction to card games. In the end, it got to the point where all the furniture in their apartment was just bare walls and an empty closet. Her parents gave away absolutely everything. At first she tried to control her mother's drinking and even worked as an assistant at a local tailor shop, trying to inspire her elders to normal life again. But very soon, she realized that her relatives were more interested in the vodka on the table and the card money in their pockets and that they viewed their daughter only as the sole breadwinner. The girl could not tolerate this way of life and left her parents to live with her grandmother. Her granddaughter was warmly welcomed by her grandmother. She, as well as the girl, for a long time tried to influence her wayward daughter, but all her attempts each time ended the same way. The girl's mother stayed and it started all over again. At first, the guy didn't know about the story with his girlfriend's relatives for a long time. However, someone managed to bring all the necessary information to the parents of the future surgeon. Naturally, the father and mother were strongly against the communication of their son and daughter in the drunken marginalized. So when the boy happily informed them that he wanted to introduce his future bride to them, they took the news with a hostile response. "Forget about this love, son, because her mother is a corrupt woman." His mother tried to talk sense into him. "How can we look decent people in the eye after that?" "But you haven't even seen her," the boy countered. "Besides, it's not her parents I want to marry. It's her. Please give us a chance. Let us introduce you to her. She's an amazing girl, not like her parents." "You understand?" my father said sternly. "No one's arguing that she's a good girl. She may be a good girl, but only now, while she's still young. But when she reaches a certain age, her bad blood will make itself felt. And there's nothing you can do about that heredity, son. You know? It's science." "You're right." "Father's right." The mother nodded in agreement. "Think about it. What will you pass on to your children through such genes?" "That's nonsense." Andrew felt his blood boil in his veins with indignation. "Say what you want. I will only live with her and no one else." With these words, he slammed his fist down on the table and ran out of the house. That night, the two lovers sat on the roof of the nice silver pendant in the form of a dove, next to which lay a silver chain, similarly gleaming in the evening light. "What is it?" she asked, surprised and a little embarrassed. It will be a token of our eternal fidelity to each other." Gasping with excitement, Andrew said and pulled back the edge of his collar. There was the same piece of jewelry around his neck. My God, it's beautiful." She smiled in vain, trying not to let a happy smile spread over her face. Andrew helped her to catch the jewelry around her neck and then kissed her sweetheart softly. "Honey, I just need to endure a couple more months. Defend my degree, and that's all. I promise we'll get married as soon as I graduate. Of course, housing won't be great at first, but I will probably be sent to practice in some distant city on distribution, and then they'll give me a place to live. We'll be fine. Just trust me, that's all." "Oh, what a dreamer you are," the girl laughed in reply. "And what am I going to do there, in that distant city of yours?" "Have you thought about it? I still have a year to study. We'll arrange a transfer for you. I'll talk to the right people. My father has a lot of connections. You'll be transferred for sure. And he'll be transferred for sure. And Helen with a scholarship." They remembered that evening for the rest of their lives, because it was the happiest night of their lives. But then suddenly everything came to a halt. About a week after that fateful conversation, the girl suddenly and unexpectedly disappeared, wherever the young bridegroom looked for her, and in the house of her dead drunk parents, and in the apartment of her grandmother. But he could not find her. The latter told the boy that the girl suddenly packed her bags and left, but where and why, the girl did not say anything about it. The sewing school could not help the guy either. The student vanished without leaving any clues as to where to look for her. A week later, his parents summoned him again for a big talk. They told the boy that his beloved had gotten mixed up with some local dodger on a fancy foreign motorcycle, and it was he who had taken her somewhere far to the north of the country, so there was no point in looking for the unfaithful bride anymore. As proof, the father brought his son a certain telegram, drawn up retrospectively. It said, ostensibly on behalf of his beloved, that she was leaving this city for good, and asked the future surgeon never to look for her or disturb her. He well remembered how the world then seemed to have turned black and red for him. hate, and jealousy were all he felt at that terrible moment. Believing his parents, the guy immersed himself headfirst in his studies, and after a brilliant defense of his degree, he immediately went to graduate school, combining studies with internships in one of the capital's most prestigious hospitals. Only now, leafing through the materials sent him a detective investigation, he knew his mother and father then ruthlessly deceived him. In fact, she had never met any motorcyclist. She had been told, as had the boy, that he had another, far more promising bride. So there was nothing for her to do next to one of the city's most respected families. The grief-stricken girl was indeed forced to leave, and the guy was soon introduced to the very Helga, who became a more lucrative match for him. As a result, a promising marriage turned into long years of moral and physical captivity for the surgeon. So the parents of a young doctor unwittingly managed to destroy several lives at once. Further fate of his beloved, as the doctor now learned, was very tragic. The girl learned that she was pregnant after moving to another city, where she had no friends or family. Adapting to a new place was very difficult. The girl constantly felt bad, and in the end was forced to spend the rest of the pregnancy in the local hospital. Unfortunately, difficult pregnancy and childbirth shook the young woman badly. After giving birth, she was able to live only 2 years, after which she died from cancer developed against a background of chronic stress. The doctor's fiancée burned out in just a few months, and no one was able to help her. The baby girl was named Emily, and her mother spent 2 years with her as the happiest in her short life. All this time, she tried to work at home, doing minor repairs to clothing, and all the while she did not give up his dream of one day to become a fashion designer. Alas, the evil fate decided otherwise. After her mother's death, the girl, with the preservation of the family name, was placed in a specialized orphanage, where the girl spent her entire childhood and adolescence, with little or no memories of her mother, except what she could gather from the mouth of the then neighbors of her mother. However, the girl did not for a moment forget the warmth of her soul, which her tired and sick mother still managed to give her. That's why her daughter's first task and duty, after ending her life in the orphanage, was to find her mother's grave and then put it in order. She had just gotten a job as a cook in a small canteen in the business center of the city. And with her first money, she put up a small but solid monument to her mother. And also put the fence in order. And since then, she began to regularly monitor the upkeep of her mother's last resting place. However, the girl's quiet life very quickly began to take dangerous turns, painfully similar to the woman's tragic fate. Just like her mother, the girl once met her future boyfriend, who turned out to be no less than the son of an influential man. The boy had come home that year to rest from his studies in London. Between young people, as quickly as it was with the representative of the last generation, feelings flared up. However, unlike Andrew, the rich major was in no hurry to propose to his beloved. Alas, she was to him only a beautiful toy and a way to have fun in the dull land of his ancestors. The young people's relationship too quickly went far enough, and the girl, finding out after a while about her pregnancy, immediately told all the major. He, of course, did not want to hear anything about the baby. He offered the girl money to get rid of it, and the guy rushed to flee back to England, having previously arranged a real scandal. During the argument, the boy promised the girl that if she told his parents about it, she could no longer hope for a quiet and regular life and work in this city. She was not the shy type. After her hapless boyfriend's departure for a foreign land, the girl nevertheless risked asking his parents for help, and that was her fatal mistake. The official family smelled a possible scandal among a pregnant woman on the streets of the city from which she had no way to leave. Listening to his daughter's story, the man could not restrain his hoarse sobs. It was only now that he decided to search for his unfulfilled fiancée. The fact is that a few months ago, his dying father finally confessed the monstrous deception he and his mother had committed against the life of his son and his beloved girl. Andrew himself could not immediately believe what he heard, but when the father proved some convincing facts, the surgeon was left in absolutely no doubt that he was telling the truth. After his father's funeral, he began at once to look for a suitable private detective, and, settling on the agency, took the risk of paying quite a large sum in advance so that he could find him at least some information about the fate of his first and only love. Frankly, the surgeon never expected that the trail that could pull the detective out of the dense tangle of the past could eventually not only lead him to the grave of his failed bride, but also give him a meeting with his own daughter, as he had already lost all hope of ever being a father. "Why are you crying?" asked the surprised Emily. She had thought to the very end that the man who had helped her out in that awkward money situation was just an old acquaintance of her late mother. "I am crying because I have finally found my real family." Without holding back tears, the surgeon said, "Emily, the thing is, your mother and we were going to get married, but things got out of hand. Anyway, I feel really bad for her." "What's that?" "For not being able to look after my daughter. Emily, I'm your birth father. As crazy as that sounds to you right now, I hope that someday you will be able to forgive me and accept my help." The girl, without saying a word, threw herself around her newfound father's neck. She squeezed him in her arms and, despite her bulging belly, pressed herself against him as tightly as she could. "Daddy, Daddy, I knew you would find me someday, even when everyone else said otherwise. I always believed. Always." The girl pulled away from her father's tear, damp cheek, and pulled back the edge of her old sweater. With shock, the man clamped his hand over his mouth. Around the girl's neck was the same maternal pendant that had once been a symbol of the couple's fidelity and love. Silently, he pulled off his pendant. The same exact piece of jewelry had rested on his neck all these long years. The girl, seeing the same silver dove, laughed happily, and at that moment her eyes were enveloped in the same light blue haze as it had been in moments of sincere happiness with her mother's eyes. A few months later, she gave birth to a healthy, strong boy, whom the surgeon himself named Bruno. The grandson was a real gift of fate for the grandfather. The quick blond boy reminded him of him and his first love as a child. The boy had inherited the same large gray eyes from his mother and grandmother. His father bought the girl her own apartment in the center, not far from his house, so he could see his daughter and grandson every day. The young mother was madly grateful to her father and did everything in her power to make sure that he never stopped feeling family care and sincere love for her daughter. After a while, when the baby became a little older, I went to work, getting a real job as a chef in one of the best restaurants in the capital. In the same year, she was sent for a short internship in Los Angeles, where she was able to comprehend all the secrets of the real Hollywood cuisine. And, of course, the girl did not forget to pamper her father with incredible dishes, who has since stopped spending evenings in hungry loneliness, contented only with the company of his beloved dog, Chaplin. Another year later, the daughter met a great guy, an intern who was interning in her father's department. The young people liked each other, and after a while, real feelings arose between them. The baby was the result of a lavish French-style wedding celebrated in the restaurant where she worked. Her husband was delighted with her child and welcomed him as his own son. Now, while the young couple deservedly enjoyed their honeymoon, the grandfather spent all his free time with his grandson. Little Bruno could play for hours without feeling tired, and all because this child was one of the first in the family for the last 2 generations to feel surrounded by the exceptional love and care of his relatives. That meant that this boy had a good chance of changing the overall karma of their family for the better.